So my name is Liebeck. I'm the Senior Director for Europe at the Clean Air Task Force. And we're going to have an interactive discussion. So we're going to have the stellar panel discuss the future of European climate action and energy security. And then we'll also invite the audience to ask questions. In the meantime, please tweet at us at CleanAirCATF with the hashtag #ZeroCarbonFuture. So before I go to the panelists, I want to give a few framing remarks why we decided to host this panel and how we at the Clean Air Task Force think about the future of Europe. Europe has long been a climate leader. It has the 2050 climate neutrality goal, Fit for 55 as an interim 2030 pathway. And Malte actually reminded me earlier, well, that's a goal. We're still negotiating. We're not yet implementing. But at CATF, we really focus on the long game. And of course, Europe finds itself at the heart of a geoeconomic and geopolitical shift. So it's really important for us to think about what is the future of European clean energy as we're reckoning that Europe can never go back to the status quo. What is the future of clean energy supply? What kind of international partnerships do we need? Manufacturing, investment, deployment of clean energy. So we're going to reflect on the state of European climate action, and we have really, really exciting, diverse perspectives. So we have George Kremlis in the middle, who is the principal advisor to the Prime Minister of Greece on energy, climate, and environment, as well as circular economy issues, a topic that's actually very big for Clean Air Task Force. We're also really excited to welcome Ayla Karibi from the European Investment Bank. She's a Chief Sustainable Finance Advisor at the European Investment Bank, which is actually the biggest climate bank in the world. We're also very excited to welcome Mr. Ole Simmons, Emik Sørensen, who's the Director of Global Cooperation at the Danish Energy Agency, which is part of the Danish Ministry for Climate, Energy and Utilities. And he's going to reflect on how European lessons for clean energy deployment could be applied globally. And then we're also really excited, personally, I'm actually really excited to welcome Mr. Malte Bonkamp from he's the head of the Industrial Decarbonization Division at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Malte has been working with Clean Air Task Force on a carbon management strategy for Europe, for Germany and Europe to really help achieve the next ambition in industrial decarbonization. Martina Montesino-Malmberg is a research program manager for the sustainable industry at the Swedish Energy Agency, and we're going to talk to her about the systems perspective, the energy crisis, and how we can use it for accelerating the clean energy transition. And then finally, last but not least, we have our very own Alessia Vrione, who is our EU Affairs Director for the Clean Air Task Force and has been working with policymakers over the past 2 years to really accelerate climate action, but also help design new policy issues. So with this, I'm really excited to kick off this panel. So maybe, George, let's start with you. COP27, I mentioned it, it's a world of public crisis. So what would you say are the implications of this very grim situation, European energy crisis, heavy social consequences, deindustrialization already underway for climate action in Europe?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. It is a real pleasure to be part of this important panel. Let me say that this is an unprecedented period. We are facing the post-COVID economic implications. We in the European Union have had a very high level of ambition with the Green Deal, the climate law, and a very ambitious climate law in Greece. Suddenly the war came, and the climate crisis with the energy crisis as a result of the war, with the food crisis and the post-COVID, let's say, elements of the crisis are acting in some kind of spillover effect and are reinforcing each other. And unfortunately, what we are facing is a period during which, although legally speaking, our level of ambitions is much higher than before, not only within the European Union, not only in my country, but also thanks to the SDGs worldwide, the emissions are increasing because of the energy crisis, because of the use of hydrocarbons and coal. In my country, we were the first to phase out from lignite. Unfortunately, we are back in lignite because the European Union has no energy resources. And although in our energy mix the percentage of renewables is high, this is not sufficient. We in Greece now are, let's say, trying to act as a hub, bringing Azeri gas through the TAP pipeline. It's a pity that there is noise from the neighboring pavilions. We are bringing gas to Bulgaria. So in that respect, the solidarity, which is one of the key elements of the EU policy, is very present because Greece is providing gas to Bulgaria. We have developed our capacity for gas storage in Revithoussa, and we have developed a floating LNG, an FSRU in the area of the Alexandroupolis. But just to come back to your question, unfortunately, notwithstanding our very high level of ambition at EU level and at Greek level, we are suffering because of the energy crisis and so on. And therefore, to some extent, there are now trade-offs which act, I would say, on the detriment of the energy transition and climate neutrality for the time being, because Europe is successfully, although belatedly, managing the energy crisis, and hopefully we will be out of the tunnel soon.
Great, thank you so much. And I think, your perspective is a stark reminder we haven't really achieved systems transformation in Europe. We're reverting back to fossil fuels to alleviate the crisis, unabated fossil fuels. So maybe, Martina, if I can go to you next. We talked earlier a little bit about the need for a systems perspective of decarbonization and energy security. And you highlighted, well, this is an opportunity for clean energy deployment and really greening the European energy system. So maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yes, thank you very much. We're very focused on the system perspective from the Swedish Energy Agency, where I work. And I think we're not as fragile when it comes to the energy crisis as such. We almost have a fossil-free energy system or at least electricity production in Sweden. But anyhow, we are quite, within the industrial sector, we are dependent on natural gas, and this is an opportunity for us to see other alternatives to come away from the natural gas and come away from that dependency. So we usually focus on 5 technology pathways within decarbonization, and that is hydrogen, electricity, carbon capture, transportation and storage, both on fossil and biogenic emissions. We also have biomass, which can be useful now to get away from the natural gas dependency. But we also need to look at the material and energy efficiency in order to be less dependent on raw materials. And I would like, to lift also this, that we need to focus on many things at the same time, and we need also to use this energy crisis as an opportunity to get away from the fossil dependency.
Great, perfect. And I think we're going to go to Alessia next. And unfortunately, we only have 2 microphones. So thank you so much for your flexibility. But I think you made really important points, and we're focusing carbon capture, hydrogen, next generation technologies beyond Fit for 55 that I mentioned earlier. So maybe, Alessia, we can go to you, and you can give us a little bit about a little insight into how Clean Air Task Force thinks about innovation for decarbonization and why we need to think past Fit for 55.
Yes. So at the moment, we are kind of facing 2 challenges in Europe at the same time, the climate one and the energy security one. And innovation will be part of the solution for both of these challenges. And to have the innovation that we need, we will need to create the framework for it. We will need to have the policy for it, but we will also need to have the investment, the business model, everything that will be required to create the framework that will give us the innovation needed for the deployment of all the technology that we're having. Am I not speaking enough in the, thanks so much for flagging. So when we look at the Fit for 55, it's a huge step forward in the sense that it put us on the path to cut 55% of our emission by 2030. But 2030 is not the goal, 2050 is, and the full decarbonization of the economies. So we need to keep the eye on the actual end goal, which is the full decarbonization. In the Fit for 55, it was a field that they covered so many different kinds of topics. You have legislation on energy, on building, on infrastructure, on so many different kinds of topics. But the thing is that you have a lot of focus on renewable and energy efficiency. And we do need as much renewable and energy efficiency that we can have. But at the same time, when we look at the full decarbonization of our economy, if we look at the 2050 goals, we need more than that. We need to deploy a lot of different technology. And for that, we need to go beyond Fit for 55. We need to go to the next timeline and integrate a lot of the technology that have been forgotten so far. So, for example, if we take carbon capture and storage, which is very likely to be needed for the decarbonization of many industries, we're lagging behind. And that's mainly because there has been a lack of policy commitment, according to the last IPCC report. And we will need it in our EU decarbonization plan. And the thing is that this technology, as many others, has a very long deployment time. So if we start looking at it in 2045, we're almost sure that we're going to miss our target. So Fit for 55 was a huge step forward, but we need to look further and to start deploying and focusing on the technology that will be needed in some of the other sectors beyond renewable and energy efficiency.
Great. Thank you, Alessia. And I think you make a very important point. We need to plan for our climate goals today and understand what kind of infrastructure Europe needs to really decarbonize. And we need to deploy the technologies as soon as possible. So, Malte, as we talked earlier, industrial decarbonization has long been a climate blind spot. There's already deindustrialization underway. Can you talk a little bit about what Germany is doing in terms of the next generation industrial decarbonization, next generation technologies, and also what kind of international partnerships you're forming? G7 presidency is just an example.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we've heard about the climate targets of climate neutrality until 2050. Germany actually decided to be climate neutral until 2045. So this must be implemented in all sectors, also in the industry sector, which is particularly a challenge. We had a meeting this morning chaired by Chancellor Scholz about the formation of a climate club and how to extend the international cooperation. And Fatih Birol, the chief of the International Energy Agency, emphasized that why it's so difficult for the industry sector, especially. On the one hand, we have the challenge of the energy security now, the energy demand of the huge energy demand by industry, which is now, of course, it's aggravated by the crisis. But at least in the energy sector, we have the technological solutions, renewables, efficiency, and so on. But for the industry sector, on the one hand, we don't have the technologies yet, not at least not on a commercial scale. So hydrogen, CCS have been mentioned, but there will need more time to be implemented. And actually, the investment cycles are so long in the industry that it's actually 2045 is tomorrow. So we really have to start these processes now. And on the other hand, industry is the only sector which is really facing international competition, international and the risk of carbon leakage. So this is like a twin challenge, or maybe three challenges, including the energy challenge. And to address this, well, Germany has has a climate program, and we have a huge new Renewables Act started. Of course, we're participating in the implementation of the European Fit for 55 program and the negotiation as well. And on the industry side, well, we're looking to or preparing carbon contracts for difference as a funding instrument at this stage. Also other funding instruments, investment funding. But also on the long run, we will not be able to fund this transformation, but we need green lead markets. And there we also have to work together internationally. That's also what the Climate Club and the G7 presidency work has been about, that we led in the industrial decarbonization agenda.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. I think very important points. 50% of emissions are actually expected to come from technologies that are not yet commercially available. And then, of course, industrial decarbonization, very important. But I also want to talk a little bit about the fact that a clean Europe is not the end game, it's just the beginning. So we need to commercialize these technologies, but there's already so many lessons that we can learn from Europe. And I'm going to share my microphone with Ole. Can you talk us a little bit about, in your work on international strategic partnerships, what lessons are you kind of communicating from Europe to other countries, and what kind of international partnerships do you see on the horizon for Europe to address this new geopolitical or geoeconomic environment we find ourselves in?
Thank you, Lee. Just a short introduction to global cooperation. It's part of the Danish Energy Agency. We are cooperating with 24 countries around the world, where we are sharing Danish lessons learned from the transition that we have been going through in Denmark. And the background there is that, for those of you who don't know Denmark, there's a lot of wind. When the wind is blowing, we have 100% of our electricity coming from wind. On average, last year, 50% of our electricity supply were from the fluctuating sources like wind and solar. So we kind of broke that barrier of balancing. We have one of the highest security supplies in the world. There's an average of 20 minutes of outage a year. So, of course, these lessons learned are very important for countries that are developing and transitioning their system into more renewable energy. All these lessons learned, 40 years of transition, we make available, technical, regulatory, lessons learned of what to do, but definitely what not to do. That's the most interesting for our partner countries, to not make the same mistakes as we have done. And there's a huge interest. Today, electricity from wind and solar is the cheapest way to produce new power. And especially today when, as Martina said, the fossil fuel prices are skyrocketing. So it's simply, it's a very low-hanging fruit. So why is it not happening by itself? Well, in the countries that we work in, the general question is security supply. How can we handle a system when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining? How can we make sure that we have electricity in our sockets 24/7? And that is rocket science. We work in many different areas, but especially power sector modeling is very important. Having a very clear view on what's happening to the energy system going ahead. How can it be more flexible? The flexibility is especially in the grid, but also in power plants. Turning the energy sector upside down, making renewable energy baseload, making the rest of the system balancing the renewable energy is a very important lesson learned from Denmark, and an important lesson that makes a lot of room for new and cheap electricity. So my 2 cents is, apart from discussing what is going to happen after 2040 and how can we reach the last 20%, it's also looking inside, reviewing the countries that we work together with, that we come from. If there's not 40, 50, 60% fluctuating electricity in the system, there's a huge low-hanging fruit today in solar and wind. We know the technology, we know it's very cheap. So increasing flexibility, especially for electricity systems that are growing, is a very important lesson learned. So that was my sense. I think I'll stop myself now.
Great, thank you so much. Isla, going to you, thinking about, I think we're hearing it over and over here, we need to mobilize more than $4 trillion annually investment in the global energy systems transformation. The European Investment Bank actually is the biggest climate bank in the world. So how do you see, what projects are you focusing on in Europe, but also internationally? How are you helping to really deploy clean energy?
Thank you. And thank you also for the invitation. I hope I can yell loud enough. It's a bit challenging. Um, yes, we are indeed a big finance provider to energy and, of course, to green energy. We labeled ourselves a few years ago the EU Climate Bank, and that means that we are really taking this very seriously. We went out of unabated fossil fuel related projects financing. We have now said that we will do half of our new lending in climate and other environmental priorities lending. The way we see it is that this current situation where we are, it's indeed like somebody already said before. It's not only we don't only have the climate crisis, but we also have an energy security crisis. We have seen that a major energy supplier to Europe was not a reliable one. And I think, and my institution thinks as well, that the solution cannot be that we do the same thing with other autocratic regimes. We go to other places. Other than short run, what we do for this winter and even next winter is not what I'm talking about. We burn our own furniture if we must stay warm, but I'm talking about investing in long term, because if you start to invest now, we are talking about locking in something for 20, 30 years. And locking in new investments in fossil fuels right now does not make sense. First of all, you have to buy the fuel from somewhere, and we have mostly unreliable sources. It is expensive and volatile because you have to buy the fuel every year. And then you also you are not independent because very few countries in Europe produce either. So green energy, clean energy, wind and solar is something that every country has got. So it's independent. It is also the cheapest energy sources to produce right now, and it's secure. So this is where we would put our money on. And now I'm really talking about the long-term investments. I'm not saying what anybody should do in the next 6 months. That's a totally different story. So this is what we think Europe should do, and this is what we are financing as well. So now the EU Fit for 55, the Repower EU, the estimates are that we need something like 450 billion euros a year investments. Add to that the recent inflation, another 50 billion, we are probably talking about 500 billion euros per year. So someone like us, plenty of private sector actors, plenty of other public sector banks, we are ready and able and willing to finance this. But now we are not the ones who take the decisions on those financing. I hear all the time that MDB should do this and MDB should do that. But look, we just lend the money. We don't take the decision to make an investment in anything. When that has been done, those people come to us and say, can you finance? That's when we come in. So we really need both the governments and also the private sector to lead there and take these investments. And we are very happy to finance. We are very happy to give our technical expertise, which we have plenty of. So we have in Europe, we have the capacity, we have the roadmap in terms of all these programs. We have a tool pack, we have taxonomy, which is telling us what is actually green enough. We have a lot of tools, so I think there are very few excuses not to do anything right now. So that's what we are doing and what we would like to do. That's for starters. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I think with this first round of questions, we have established a few very important aspects or characteristics about Europe's path to climate neutrality. I think the first one is we're seeing different speeds. Germany says climate neutrality by 2045, but EU overall as 2050. Sweden, very low penetration of fossil energy, very low exposure to energy crisis. Greece really taking a stance of solidarity, but also very important lessons internationally. So, the question is, what now, right? What are we going to do after we have tackled the crisis? I think you talked about it really in a really important perspective. The next 2 years, we need to think about how we're going to address the crisis and then about the long term. So maybe, George, we can go back to you. And we can talk a little bit about the existing policies that we're still negotiating. the Fit for 55. So do you think this is still the right tool for this purpose in this new economic and energy reality? And then what other tools are you looking at? And maybe you can zoom in and zoom out also from a Greek perspective, because we really want to look at the individual countries, which are so diverse, while also thinking of the European Union bloc as a whole.
Thank you, Lee. Let me add to complement the picture that in our climate law, we have a target by 2040 to reduce emissions by 80%. We will reach carbon neutrality by 2050 as the other member states of the EU. But of course, we had more ambitious targets as regards phasing out from lignite by 2028. Hopefully, we will manage to do so. Now, Repower EU and Fit for 55 are extremely useful. Of course, as I often say, we would need a new next generation EU, which was developed because of the pandemic, to face the crisis, the energy crisis, the food crisis, and the war. And we all believe that notwithstanding the added value of Repower EU and Fit for 55, measures are needed, first of all, to ensure energy security. And in Europe, we have stored more than 90% of gas, with 9% only imports from Gazprom. But still, if this disappears, the storage will not be sufficient to ensure our needs at European level. And of course, the other key issue is the prices of the energy. There are very strong discussions on the TTF, on a ceiling, on the gas price, which determines the electricity price. These are discussed at all levels within the European Union. There are ideas, there are proposals, but we have not yet reached binding decisions on that. Now, what we are doing in Greece, first of all, we are promoting solidarity vis-à-vis Bulgaria. We are increasing our storage capacity in Revithousa with an additional floating LNG. We are boosting our renewables. We are now tendering big tenders for batteries storage, which is a good thing because you need to store energy if you have solar and wind, and this is the key, I would say, prerequisite. And we are developing ideas to bring through undersea cables clean energy from Egypt to Greece, which will satisfy to some extent the needs of Greece, but then through the European grid will reach the other countries of the European Union. And I do believe that this giga project, bringing energy from Morocco, from Egypt, clean energy that will be produced here from renewables, will be an alternative source of clean energy, extremely useful to the European Union. So there are a lot of things, and last but not least, we are developing now a law which will foresee wind offshore, and the tenders will be launched soon for wind offshore parks, which will increase the energy mix coming from renewables. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I want to pick up on one aspect that you said. I mean, you said a lot of very important, interesting pieces have to fall into place. But I think next generation EU, a new policy instrument, new policy vision. So maybe I can go to Malte and Alessia next. Malte, I would love to, as you're thinking about industrial decarbonization, what do you think are some of these next generation policy measures? And then I want to go to Alessia to talk a little bit about policy innovation and how CATF thinks about policy innovation.
Yes, thank you. Well, let me emphasize all the discussion that we lead with industry. I think there's one thing is always clear, that the short-term fight against crisis should not go on the cost of the long-term transformation investments. and in a way, even it emphasizes the need to invest faster in new technologies and in renewables. And why is it also urgent? Because in the next years, a lot of industry investments will be replaced installations in Germany, in many countries, but also in developing and emerging economies. New capacities are built up, and that means that we have to ensure that they don't lock in old technologies and invest in old technologies. And that's what the Next Generation EU and the Repower tries to do at the same time. On the one hand, fight the crisis, but also provide the support funds and investments for the new technologies. And well, it's kind of a balancing act, so you have to keep both objectives in mind. Yeah, but it's necessary because otherwise, if you invest in the wrong technologies now, then you never get to climate neutrality. And yeah, this is maybe this is the framework. But the most important thing is that companies do invest, and you need a reliable framework for that. Like not only a carbon price, which incentivizes investments, but you need also the security that your investment, that your green technology will be able to compete with the gray technology, and also that that for a transition time that the existing gray technologies or installations in Europe will be able to compete on the international markets, because we just still need them for a while. So you can't shift like with a finger snap from whole gray to whole green. So this will be take some time, and this is where the instruments have to focus on.
Actually, can I follow up on this really quickly? So you say, we're going to replace a lot of industrial assets in Germany over the next couple of years. How does the energy crisis feature into this? Feature into competitiveness? How is the government thinking about this right now?
Well, it's affecting two times. On the one hand, of course, it doesn't make it easier to invest in this environment of unsecure, unstable energy supply and higher prices. On the other hand, it shows that we have to invest more quickly in new technologies and new supplies. So, and we have to make sure with our instruments, also the European instruments, that the investments follow. And I think the long-term perspective is very important here, because we are also, we have an energy crisis, we have high energy prices, so it's the circumstances are not ideal, let's say, for the least. But on the other hand, if we really commit to say we create green lead markets, that's a new narrative. Why to invest in these technologies and why to do that in Europe? Because Europe would be like the lead market for these kind of technologies.
Music to my ears. Green lead markets, new narrative, new policy instruments, invest quicker in industrial assets in Europe. So, Alessia, let's go to you. We have been thinking about these questions. How should European policymakers think about designing the next generation climate policy, where climate is really a political economy outcome? And then maybe you could talk a little bit also about how fast that could happen, but also what the dynamics could be between member states and European Union institutions.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned, the first thing that needs to change is the timeline horizon that we're using from 2030 to 2050. Another element that needs to change is that we need to embrace optionality when we're designing the different kind of policy for climate decarbonization. When we look at the situation in Europe, we have a lot of very different industry, a lot of very different countries, and they should all have the different options on the table for them to be able to decarbonize on time. So in the process that we are now on global warming, we can no longer afford to just take some option off the table and put all our basket in one technology. We need to have an optionality approach with different kind of green technology that will help us make sure that we arrive at our decarbonization goal on time. So that's a really important point. It's even more important when you take into consideration the risk in the decarbonization plan. We can never be 100% sure that everything will go according to plan. And I think that the current situation is a very stark reminder of that. So we always need to have a plan B ready because we don't know what will happen. And that we need to have like the technology needed to fall back on a plan B whenever it is needed. We also need to move to about a better balance between the stick and the carrots. So in Europe, we do have a lot of decarbonization targets. We have a carbon price, but we cannot only ask industry to decarbonize. We need to make sure that they have the tools required to actually decarbonize. And for that, we need to support technology deployment. And like a very good example that was mentioned, for example, is carbon contract for difference. It's a way to make sure that the company have a business case to decarbonize and to provide some kind of certainty to markets so that they can invest in the technology that they know will help them decarbonize their value chain. So we need to have some kind of policy innovation where we are looking at different kind of policy than what we've been doing so far, because we are facing a different kind of challenge and because we need to support so many different kind of industry in the decarbonization process. And finally, we need to have a global approach. If we decarbonize Europe at the expense of the other part of the world, that's not the goal. We do not want to have a clean Europe in a dirty world. So we need to always keep in mind that when we are bringing clean energy to Europe, it should be additional. It should not be at the expense of another region. We also need to deepen our partnership with other parts of the world. For example, the southern part of the Mediterranean is going to be a key partner when we look at energy imports, and we need to discuss with them both energy and climate side by side and together to make sure that whatever we import, it's fully integrating climate consideration. So when we are asking about the dynamic between the EU and the member states, we do need to have strong cooperation, but we also need to respect the fact that each member state will have a different pathway. So the EU should provide a common goal and help coordinate it between countries. It should help also everything related to cross-border infrastructure that will be needed. So the EU has a very strong role in terms of leadership, but then the member states know their industry better and know better what is more appropriate in their country to decarbonize. So you really need to have it going both ways, from the EU to the member state and from the member state to the EU, so that together they can develop a framework that would allow them all to decarbonize on time.
Great. Thank you, Alessias. Very, very important points. And I think I want to go to the member states and really understand what's the benefit of first movers, current policies, but all the policies that governments are thinking about. But first, I want to go to you, Ayla, because I think we've heard really important synergies from Malte, Alessia, and George. And this is, we need new policy frameworks, but also new investment, and we need it fast. So how does the EIB play to this?
Thank you. Policy maker, I'm not, so I can't be speaking for that. We are policy takers from the EU. But I think I subscribe to a lot to what Alessia was saying, and somebody said, was it you earlier, that a lot of what we think that we need to do, we are counting on innovation and technology developing. So, okay, we have done at EIB, we have done quite a lot of this over the past 20 years. We have put some 200 billion into financing innovation and R&D and education. So we have some experience in this field. But this is something that must go even higher. And there are several areas what we need to do. I mean, obviously, we have already talked about hydrogen, but we just did earlier this year a survey of some 50 actors in the hydrogen base, and everybody pretty much agrees that this is not yet commercially viable. It's still too expensive. It's not yet efficient enough. And one needs to have more green energy available and lower prices and extended hours and so on and so forth. So that is one thing that we need, because we need hydrogen for the heavy emitting sectors. We are going to need still for a lot of things, steel, aluminium, cement and all of this, and we need hydrogen probably for these sectors. We also need it for the heavy transport. It's probably the most viable option. We also need to do more and innovate in recycling of raw materials, so that we are not just digging up new materials all the time, new raw materials. And And for example, when we talk about electrification means a huge needs of batteries, but not only battery technology, but then also charging networks, charging stations. We need all of that, both for cars, but also for everything else. And then, of course, in the energy field, we need to keep innovating there. We have just financed, was it last year, I think, a floating wind farm off the coast of Portugal. It's a very promising technology. I mean, it could be huge if it can be brought to operate on a sort of industrial scale. So far, it's quite at the beginning yet. I think there are 4 different technologies that are being tested. We don't know which one is going to be the best, but this I think is something that the public institution like ours should be supporting, and we do this for the bigger industries like energy, but we also have instruments which we do together with the European Commission, for example, to take quite high risks in very, very small companies, even startups who are acting in innovation and technology, just to support them at the beginning so that they can scale up a little bit their activities. And this, I think, is very important. It's something where you need public money, but I think one hears often that, yeah, but we don't know. We are not the ones who can pick the winners. But that's not what we need to do. We don't need to pick the winners because, frankly, who knows who is going to be the winner. What we need to do is not to pick the sure losers, i.e. fossil solutions which will be stranded assets in not too distant future. So that's all we need to do. We need to take a risk. We lose some, we win some, but don't pick the losers. That's all.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to go, you talked a little bit about hydrogen. I want to go to Martina because Sweden has a lot of first mover projects on some of the technologies that we already established are needed but not yet commercially available at scale. So Martina, maybe you can talk a little bit about the importance of first movers and how the Swedish government has really worked to make them move first.
Yes, I think I will continue on the theme with policy and policy instruments. Okay. And yeah, we're part of the European Union, so of course we are affected by the policies we have in the European Union. And you mentioned Malta, I think the Next Generation EU, which has financed a big program we have in Sweden where we support industries to decarbonize. And I think that has been one tool to encourage industries to move forward. Then we have other policy instruments, such as the European Union emission trading system, which also, I mean, it's a cost for the industries to have high emissions, and that's also has worked to force them to move. And yeah, we also have the European Innovation Fund. But then I think there are other aspects, and I also think maybe the industries themselves should talk for them. But I think one thing that is the motivation that is created when you are a first mover within these companies, how you attract new talents, but also keep talents in your companies. And also, one thing that I think the Swedish companies are well aware of is that the young generation now is very keen on the sustainability issue and choose employment after. I mean, I think that's the main question for them when they look for jobs, many at least. Yeah, and I also think maybe in some kind of future we might see that this unsustainable alternative, the unsustainable products, become the account in like the actual facts on climate and environment, health, and other issues that they actually also cause, and that the costs will increase on the unsustainable alternatives. So it will be beneficial also from a pricing perspective and to be, yeah, attractive on the market.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to, reflect on one part that you said. We need to think about the future clean energy workforce. What kind of talent do we need especially as 40 million people are employed in Europe in the industrial sector, but also what kind of skills do we need to actually deliver clean energy deployment? What kind of talent? How can we retain talent in the clean energy sector? So really, really important. But as we are talking about kind of national or member state level policies, maybe Ole, I can go to you. I would love to hear about the Danish Climate Act and kind of what technologies and policies Denmark is pursuing at the moment and how you're using this for more strategic international partnerships.
There's a long version and then there's a short version. I think the Climate Act is it's also interesting in the fact that that you have the full parliament in Denmark who agreed on our 2030 and our 2050 commitments, and what is also important, I mean, going into the future, there's a lot of ideas on balancing, on green hydrogen, on electrification, not just on cars, but also on heat pumps, which is, I mean, we have a lot of heat pumps in Denmark, especially in the winter. How can we use them more flexible, smart gridded, etc. But what is interesting in the daily work and the year by year is that in the Climate Act, the Danish Energy Agency every year have to come up with a plan of and present to Parliament what are we going to do the next year, looking at what is immediately available, what are the main issues at hand, what should we focus on right now, and then also, of course, in order to reach the 2030 or 2040 or 2050 targets. If I may, because we've touched upon accelerating the transition also in Denmark, it's also in Europe. Malte, you talked about a reliable framework, and George, you talked about interconnectors as a part of the flexibility. In the finance, there's a lot of finance available, but how can we reduce? How can we reduce risk for investors? I think also that's a very important topic, even in Europe. Transparent tendering procedures, but also one-stop shop models on permitting. I talked to the industry, and the industry say, well, it's a big risk when it takes 6, 7, 10 years to get permits and get environmental impact assessments, etc. That is not speeding up the transition. So Fit for 55 said, can we do it in 1 year? I think if we have to look at what could be the future or immediately reactions to this is to try to see how can we put a 1-year target on the permitting. So that's the question.
Great, thank you. And I want to go to George. I think this is really important. And again, very important point on deployment timelines. We need to shorten deployment timelines. We need to also already think about how can we create permitting regimes for next generation technology. So there's a lot of work, a lot of incremental policy work to be done to really transform the European energy system. But George, can you talk a little bit about Greece and the domestic clean energy policies? How are you looking at innovation? What are some of the next generation technologies you're considering?
We have foreseen amounts under the recovery and resilience strategy of the country to support hydrogen projects, especially in the region of Western Macedonia, which is a region that has to phase out from lignite, as there are important power plants there using lignite. So hydrogen is there and is very important as the fuel of the future, expecting, of course, the fusion to become a reality. The second point is that as we are developing gas pipelines, you know that we are bringing gas through TANAP and TAP, Aderi gas to the European Union and IGB to Bulgaria. These gas pipelines have to be dual gas pipelines. In other words, they have to fit for hydrogen in the future. They can accommodate both gas and hydrogen for the time being, and in the future they will become gas pipelines. And I must say that compared to Repower EU, Greece has already developed a lot of initiatives on electromobility, on incentives, on green buildings, on the saving energy, on the energy efficiency, on giving rewards to the citizens to put solar panels on the roofs, on changing their heating systems to make them cleaner. So a lot of incentives have been taken. And as I have the floor, I do believe that we need to develop a new climate culture, starting from the households, because now we need all to save energy. And we need to save energy to pay less at the end of the month, as the bills now are extremely high for the households. So this is the positive element of a crisis, but this will also lead to a new culture, which is also supported by incentives. So we are trying to develop all that in Greece, and I do believe that this new climate culture is extremely important at the level of all of us, with a view to reducing our climate, environmental, and energy footprint.
Great, thank you. And I want to also invite the audience to come in. If there's any questions in the audience, please signal to me as we're coming to the close of this panel. But maybe we can do a little lightning round. So I would love for the microphone to come over here to Ole. And as we're kind of, concluding the panel, we can have some perspectives. If you're reflecting on the panel, first we kind of establish, okay, here's where we are. This is where Europe is different, and these are kind of the big challenges that we're facing right now. And then we went into talking about the future, next generation technologies, next generation policies, next generation investment needs. What are the most important, in 3 words or maybe a sentence, what is the most important aspect you think Europe needs to focus on in the long term to really achieve its climate goals, both on the member state level and in EU-wide level? And of course, Alessia has an advantage here because Ola has to go first.
I would start with the immediate challenge. I would simply start with the permitting. I would start with the employment of what is easily implemented right now. So that's where I'll start. You can build solar PV and wind very fast. It takes a long time to build other power plants. So that will start there.
Yeah, lightning rounds.
I think I'll stick to this focus on many things at the same time. We have, like Alessia also said, we need to develop many technologies and also look into energy storage in batteries and hydrogen storage.
Thank you. Well, I make 2 points. First point is this current situation, this energy crisis, this is not a reason to postpone the transition. This is the best reason ever to accelerate it. We have never had such a situation. And secondly, I think we didn't speak about it enough. We should have talked it first about energy efficiency, as you mentioned. I think we are 2 of the very rare people in this room who might remember the 1970s energy crisis, which was switch off the light, close the door, all this. So best energy is the one that we don't use. And back then, with the oil crisis, the whole world got extremely innovative very quickly about how to save oil and how to save energy. We just need to do the same, and we have so many more tools than we had in the 1970s. So just let's go for it.
As I skipped. No, I think that as the conference on the future of Europe was concluded, one of the things that we need to keep in mind, although times are difficult, is when reviewing the treaties, because at some stage we have to review the Lisbon Treaty, as we expect enlargements and we need to put order in our house while we are welcoming the new member states. I believe that we need a full-fledged European energy union. I was in charge of the European Steel and Coal Community, which has expired. We need to pool our resources. We need to connect our grids. We need to become self-sufficient. We need to develop our own energy resources. We do not have our own energy resources. We do have. We have sun, we have geothermy, we have biomass, and we are developing all that. So I do believe that we need also this political message that we need more institutional, a European energy union. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Really important because Malte, who's next, earlier said we need a new narrative, a new vision. Malte, lightning answer.
Yes, I think the most important is to create a business case for these new technologies and to create markets, green markets, also on the international level, not only in Germany or Europe, but work together internationally and really push these new technologies so they can get into the market.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So I would stress again the need for optionality in the technology that we are using and the need to keep everything on the table. And I would add that we need a very strong cooperation between the EU level, the member state level, but then also industry and investment bank so that they can all work together to have the framework needed. And I really love the idea to using the treaty change to boost a European energy for that.
Thank you. Okay, I want to check one more time. Are there any questions in the audience? I think there's one right here.
Thank you, and thank you all. It's been a really interesting conversation. I want to follow up on this creating green markets and go back to something that was mentioned during the conversation. So I think we can separate this into two things. One is the green premium, which I think the EU and member states have done a very good job of addressing with things like the ETS and other incentives for investment. But I want to talk about the green risk, and especially for these companies that are investing in technologies that are not at commercial scale yet. There's a significant amount of risk of being the first investors, of investing a lot in these early stage technologies. And so I want to ask, obviously, that investment's super important. How can the EU, or how is the EU addressing that risk and de-risking those important investments?
I think, Malte, that's your question, I think.
For the industry sector, yes. As I said, I think you need a whole framework. You need first regulatory measures. Well, you need the ETS, the carbon price, but it's not high enough on the one hand to really make these investments profitable. And also you need carbon leakage framework, so protection against carbon leakage. So even if you would have a high enough carbon price, then the alternative could be imports, like gray imports. So you need a market framework regulatory, you need economic incentives, but you also need government support for transitional phase, at least for these new technologies.
Anyone else would take on this question? Isla, is this no? Okay, well, is there any closing remarks before I close out this really stellar discussion? So I just want to close out here a little bit and explain, why we designed this panel this way and what CATF is going to do in Europe over the next couple of months. And this is really, we talked about a new vision. We talked about the current plans and some of the tools, while they're really strategic and also play into, as you said, Ole, deploying what we already have as fast as possible. We also heard that Europe needs to think about its energy security in the long term, that we need to have a new narrative. We need to mobilize new technologies as fast as we can. We have to, as you said, George, a new treaties change. Energy union is some of the vision that you articulated. Technology optionality to reduce risk in Europe's energy transition. And of course, we're looking at, as we learned from this panel, vastly different countries with vastly different resource, political, and economic circumstances. So please all stay tuned. CATF is going to work on what this vision could look like, also manufacturing, job creation, as well as, of course, domestic industries. How could Europe potentially be self-sufficient while it's, of course, right now the largest energy importer? So thank you so much for this stellar panel. Incredible perspectives. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here at Zero Carbon Future. And we're looking forward to our next panel at 3:30 we're going to zoom in on modeling Africa's energy transition with our absolutely incredible Lily Ordano and our team from our Africa program. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.